Fereshta Abbasi, thank you so much for coming on the show for the second time. I'm really grateful for you to making time available.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Now, I wanted to have this conversation, of course, about we're just approaching the fourth year anniversary of the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. A lot has happened since, and you have been one of the most, if not the most, active advocate for human rights in Afghanistan, trying to continue to raise awareness about what's going on inside the country under the Taliban rule. Just for us to have this conversation to really look back to what these 4 years have meant for Afghanistan and for human rights of the people of Afghanistan in particular.
This is a very grim anniversary. I think it's a reminder of a very dark day, 15th of August 2021, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan. And since then, we have seen that Afghanistan is experiencing one of the worst humanitarian and human rights crises in the world. In the past 4 years, the Taliban have intensified their attacks on the rights of women and girls, on human rights, on people's fundamental rights in the country. So in 2025, Afghanistan remains to be the only country in the world where its women and girls do not have access to secondary and higher education. Women face severe restrictions in accessing employment, freedom of movement, and also they don't have the right to freedom of expression. When you speak to women in Afghanistan, they define their situation as if they're living in a prison. The latest attack on the rights of women and girls is the PVPV law, or the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice law, which was published last August. So this August is not only the fourth anniversary of the Taliban takeover, but also the anniversary of the PVPV law, which is the most blatant attack on the rights of women and girls. The PVPV law says that women and girls' voices cannot be heard outside their homes. So you can clearly see that Taliban have the audacity to come up with all these abusive policies, which challenges women's, not only restricts their access to the fundamental rights, but also challenges their autonomy and their individuality.
Just give us a few examples of what's really been happening to women and members of other communities, and the material impacts that they've had on the country.
I would say that the Taliban have actually started these attacks on human rights quite early on. A few days ago, I was going through some of the videos of women's protesters right after the 15th of August 2021. And I was looking at some of these videos that were from 18th and 19th of August, all the way up to 3rd of September, 7th of September. So there are some, there are some specific dates that Afghan women started protesting in reaction to, for example, the Taliban introducing their cabinet, the Taliban coming up, demolishing the Ministry of Women's Affairs, and then introducing the PVPV ministry. And with each of these videos, like when I started from the 16th of August, and then I was going all the way to September 2021, I could easily see that how difficult it has become for women to protest, but at the same time, how this space is shrinking. So if you go and look in those videos, that is publicly available, because the media, especially at the time, the international media, had some sort of presence in Afghanistan. So you can see that how difficult it has become, but at the same time, how impossible that is right now in Afghanistan. So in some of these videos, you could see dozens of women on the street calling for their fundamental rights. Now they cannot do that. In terms of what exactly these restrictions means for women's rights, when you speak to women in Afghanistan, for example, those who used to have a job can no longer work. A few weeks ago, I think it was a friend of ours who actually tweeted about it, and he said that after the mass detention or arbitrary detention of women in Kabul for not having a mahram or a male guardian, we had to tell our female staff to work from home because we aren't sure if they're safe outside. So you can see with every day, that sort of normal life is being taken away from Afghan women. I mean, from everyone in Afghanistan, but especially women and girls in Afghanistan. So when you talk to them, it's not only about their physical access to these rights. They're all and it's also the mental health, I mean, impact on it. They all have some sort of depression, a mental health disorder. They're extremely anxious. And they live in uncertainty, so they don't know what their future is, and it's very difficult to stay hopeful for a better future. When I speak to my friends who are still back in Afghanistan, when I speak to people who I know, my own network in Afghanistan, it's difficult, very difficult for me to give them hope. I think I could probably right after August 2021 tell them that, oh, it won't stay this long. It's impossible for them to stay this long. This madness cannot sustain. And now it's even for me, I cannot find the words to give them hope.
You've been, going around places, speaking at conferences, writing, advocating. What have been the challenges of, doing all the work that you do on the outside?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that no one wants to listen. No one wants to listen about. No one wants to hear about Afghanistan anymore. And I think in the past 4 years, some narrative have also been shaped by the international community around Afghanistan. So, for example, I mean, we have heard that I think there is a distinction between women in Afghanistan and women in exile. So the way that they look into those who are outside Afghanistan is that, well, you're out now, you're living a safe life, I mean, you're privileged, you're part of the elite community of Afghanistan because you made it out. So all these restrictions that is happening in Afghanistan is not really impacting your life. So your views don't really matter anymore. But what they don't see, I mean, in this context, is that those who are inside cannot be critical. I think, I mean, I would say that in the past 4 years, it's the diaspora, it's the in exile human rights defenders and activists who have been very vocal and critical of the Taliban, because those who are inside, they cannot be critical, and there's no civic space inside Afghanistan. So yes, I mean, I have been traveling quite a lot in the past 4 years, from one country to another country, different capitals, speaking with diplomats, speaking, I mean, at universities with students, speaking at conferences, because I want to make sure that people know what is happening in Afghanistan. The international media no longer picks up on Afghanistan. You don't hear about it a lot. I mean, we're living in the UK. It doesn't make to the newspapers here. People don't really know about what is happening in Afghanistan. In some of these conferences, when I go and speak, I am often being asked very naive questions that, oh, we didn't know that. Oh, women are not allowed to go to work. Women are not allowed to study. I mean, these are the things that you think that people would know, but they don't. So for me, one of the biggest things that is quite important is to make sure that people know what is happening in Afghanistan. And similarly, they also raise this awareness, because I'm worried that the Taliban are going to use this gap of information to come up with I mean, more abusive policies.
But you just mentioned the gap for information. A lot of disinformation is being disseminated about, what's going on inside Afghanistan. And the Taliban themselves have become very adept at using the social media space in disseminating information, issuing threats, doing all the things that other authoritarians have been doing through social media, injecting a sense of poisoned narrative into the whole issue when it comes to the rights of women, the rights of, trying to narrow the definition of what a woman's role should be, or what a, human rights definitions should be per se, vis-a-vis their religious beliefs. And of course, the attacks have been primarily against the advocates, people like yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I do not think that the Taliban are naive. I mean, I think the perception about the Taliban basically is that they are a group of men who are holding guns. They don't really know how the social media works. They don't really know how the systems work. It's not the case. I mean, the Taliban spokesperson, Zabihullah Mujahid, is quite active on Twitter, for example. He tweets in English, he tweets in Pashto, he tweets in Dari, he tweets what the Taliban position is on different issues. So they do use these things. And I mean, I totally agree with you that now they know these tools. And they're also trying to, have their own propaganda about how things are rosy in Afghanistan. It's not only the Taliban. I think, again, this is extremely harmful to all the advocacy that Afghan women are doing and have been doing in the past 4 years. But there are also international people who are going to Afghanistan. We have international bloggers and YouTubers who are going to Afghanistan, women as well. And they come up with these stories that, oh, they've been respected. I think I was reading 2 days ago that a female YouTuber went to Afghanistan, and then she came back and said that the Taliban have treated her like a queen. So one thing that I want to say at this moment is that I think it's quite important to know where you're going, why you're going to Afghanistan, and what are the consequences of traveling to Afghanistan? Because, for example, we have seen that the international, very prestigious international correspondents for Afghanistan who are working for the media is not allowed to go to Afghanistan. So if you're critical, you can't get into Afghanistan. The UN Special Rapporteur for the situation of human rights in Afghanistan, Richard Bennett, is not allowed to go to the country. So I think it's very important for us as human beings on this planet to know what our responsibilities are when it comes to, our social responsibilities, and to ensure that what we're doing is not harmful. Especially for women. To be honest, I cannot really understand that why there are people who would want to go to Afghanistan and who would want to give a rosy picture of Afghanistan in a situation that, half of the population in that country do not have access to secondary and higher education. Just close your eyes for a minute. Think about it. What if you were an Afghan woman and you did not have access to these very basic rights that you can easily access every day? Would you still do the same thing? I don't think the answer is yes.
But there's also a lot of misconception about what's really going on and the lack of understanding of what Afghanistan really is about. I was having a conversation with a senior Western diplomat a couple of weeks ago, and the question of conversation, naturally led to talking about Afghanistan, and it was the interactions with the Taliban. He mentioned something that has been, stuck into my mind, and people on this show have spoken to an extent about it as well. He said, well, not much has really changed when it comes to the situation for women in Afghanistan. All the noise and all the protests and all, for him, the educated middle class of Afghan women, or Afghan society who fled Afghanistan, they've been vocal about losing their rights. And those who are living in the cities, they lost the rights that they had not had previous to the Republic coming to power. And for people outside and cities, nothing's really changed. And people, women in Helmand or Kandahar or Uruzgan or north, south, east, west, they felt no difference. So in a sense, that the idea of the narrative is Afghanistan is what it is. Like, it's on us that we, changed a bit of the fabric of Afghan society, and now, they're the most vocal about things happening, where in reality in the villages and rural areas, nothing's really changed, and they're quite happy with the Taliban.
I agree that Afghanistan has always been one of the worst countries for a woman, even before the takeover. So it's not a black and white picture. Women's rights, women had a lot of issues before the takeover as well. But what is happening right now in Afghanistan is, total madness. Afghanistan is an extremely diverse country. The way that the Taliban takeover has impacted women's rights is very different from Kabul to northern Afghanistan, from northern Afghanistan to the west, and from the west to the south. So I think if you speak to a woman in Herat, the way that the Taliban takeover has impacted her life is very different from a woman in Daikundi. And similarly, you cannot compare the life of a woman in Daikundi to a woman in Kandahar. So, one of the things that the diplomats and the international community who's still engaged with Afghanistan need to understand is that they need to know Afghanistan well first. Sometimes in some of these meetings with these diplomats, I feel like 20 years of presence in Afghanistan, they still don't know the country. And there's a lot of misconceptions about Afghanistan. I don't think if the cultural argument would really work here, because under international human rights law, people are entitled to their fundamental human rights, no matter where they're living. These are universal rights. So a woman in a village in Uruzgan is entitled to the same rights as a woman in urban city of Kabul. So I mean, if you go back and look at the statistics of how many girls had access to education before the Taliban takeover, you can see how those numbers have dropped. I don't really buy that argument to say that Afghanistan is a cultural, all what is happening in Afghanistan is all about Afghanistan's culture. So I believe that the Taliban are an extremist group. I believe that the Taliban are an extremely misogynist group. I also agree that Afghanistan is a conservative and misogynist society. But in the past 20 years, there has been a space for women to stand for their rights. So, I mean, as a person who's lived in Afghanistan before the takeover, and I cannot even compare my life to what is happening right now in Afghanistan, and I cannot even imagine what would I have done if I was still in Afghanistan. And I'm not from Kabul. I actually come from a rural, a part of Afghanistan.
The humanitarian situation, for me, human rights worsening inevitably worsens humanitarian situation as well. And Afghanistan has been going through not just a crisis, but crises driven by, as those who are involved in the sector, man-made human rights crisis, because the Taliban have brought it on themselves, by depriving women of all their rights. They've essentially broken a large part of Afghanistan's society and economy, which again deepened the country's need for humanitarian support, which again, given the narrative and the attitude in the West about contributing to aid agencies, but also investment on international development, has really, really knocked Afghanistan down quite a lot. So how do you see the synergies between the two situations?
So on the humanitarian crisis part, I mean, especially this year, because we're very concerned about the situation in Afghanistan. 22.7 million Afghan, which is more than half of Afghanistan's population, will face food insecurity by the end of this year. And with the recent changes in the U.S. administration and the aid cuts have had significant impacts on Afghanistan, because U.S. Used to be one of the largest donors of Afghanistan's humanitarian aid. They used to provide around 40% of the budget, and as well as the UK. I mean, another largest donor to Afghanistan, that have also made significant cuts to the aid by 151 million pounds this year. So it's quite concerning, because the UN Humanitarian Response Plan for this year, which we are, already in August, is only funded by less than 20%. And among these 23 million or 3.5 million children who are going to be malnourished this year. I think the Taliban needs to take responsibility for the worsening of the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. The Taliban leadership is responsible for that. As you said, the restrictions on women have made it very difficult for the humanitarian aid organization to mitigate the crisis in Afghanistan, and have made it very difficult for them to operate in Afghanistan, especially, the restrictions like women need to be accompanied by a mahram or a male guardian, women need to be in full hijab. And again, we have seen recently that the PVPB ministry have started arbitrarily detaining women for bad hijab, as what they call it, bad hijab, for not being covered properly and for not having a mahram, basically. So there is an ongoing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. What the international community needs to remember is that there is a need for them to differentiate between the people of Afghanistan and the de facto authorities, or the Taliban. They cannot punish the people of Afghanistan for the Taliban's act. So it's extremely important to ensure that there is enough budget and funding for the UN Humanitarian Response Plan to help people of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a collective failure. When we speak about the Taliban takeover, for me, the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan is not 15th of August 2021. It's actually February 2020, when the US broke a deal with the Taliban, excluding the former Afghan government. It gave the Taliban more leverage. The Taliban announced victory right after signing that agreement. So I think the international community have made huge mistakes in Afghanistan, and at this point, they cannot just go away. They need to stand with Afghans, and they need to ensure that Afghans are not going to die out of hunger in 2025.
The international community has to differentiate between what the Taliban are doing and what the people of Afghanistan are going through. And that very same argument is being used from those who want a deeper engagement with the Taliban to say, okay, for us to be able to deliver a certain amount of support to the people of Afghanistan, we have to go through the Taliban. And they are the government. We have to work with them. We have to deal with them. We have to establish a deeper level of relationship so we can both work together to mitigate that, to that humanitarian crisis. That's also the reason for others to say, because of all the Taliban doing, we cannot engage. We cannot engage with the Taliban.
That engagement needs to be principled. I mean, for very early on, I remember the first, after a few months of the Taliban takeover, we at Human Rights Watch came up with a list of what the diplomats were going to Kabul shouldn't be doing. I mean, at the time, we're calling on the diplomats to not take pictures with the Taliban, to not smile in those pictures with the Taliban, to not shake hands with the Taliban. So the bar and the threshold was that low. We were calling on the international community, especially the EU, to send female diplomats to Afghanistan. Let the Taliban face these strong women who speak about foreign policy, who speak about feminist foreign policy. So those are the things that we've started calling early on, and I still would say that these engagement with the de facto authorities, as much as it's needed, needs to be principled, which means that human rights needs to be at the core of this agenda. Whether these diplomats are meeting with the Taliban in Kabul or Doha or elsewhere, they need to ensure that they're raising human rights issues. We have called on the international community to ensure that there is enough aid going to Afghanistan, but we have also called on them to ensure that this aid is not reiterating the Taliban's abusive policies. So and I know that this is a very fine line that they need to walk, but this is the only solution that we have right now for Afghanistan. So human rights needs to be, human rights, especially women's rights, needs to be at the core of these talks. They need to be talking about, we have recently had the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants for the two of the Taliban leaders, Hibatullah Khanzada and Hakim Haqqani. So they need to know that when they engage with the de facto authorities, some of these individuals are perpetrators of grave crimes. So and that's important. At this point, we don't have a mechanism right now in Afghanistan that identifies perpetrators, and that's what the civil society have been calling for the past year. But it's very important for them to know that the de facto authority in Afghanistan is responsible for grave abuses. So the sort of engagement that they're looking for, they need to ensure that it is principled and they can justify their engagement with the de facto authorities, the level of their engagement with the de facto authorities. The international community needs to listen to the people of Afghanistan. I think this is one of the mistakes that they did in the past 20 years. They were not listening to the people of Afghanistan. I remember in February 2020, when the peace agreement, when there were these, at the beginning, there were rumors about the peace agreement, and then eventually, yes, it was signed. At the time, I remember that groups of women were getting together and were calling actually on the US, on the international community, on the UN to ensure that there were some red lines included in this agreement, including women's right to education, women's right to work. Because Afghan women, even from that time, we had the experience of the first Taliban takeover. We had the experience of their 4 years in Afghanistan in the 1990s. We knew what it meant for the Taliban to get power in Afghanistan. And that's why we were concerned from the beginning, but no one listened at the time. And right now, I think it's similarly the same. If you listen to what the female protesters have been calling in the past 4 years, if you listen to women in Afghanistan, I have never heard of anyone calling for the recognition of the Taliban, because I think they're very far away from being recognized. First of all, yes, they have taken over Afghanistan, but do they really have the legitimacy? Do they really represent the will of the people of Afghanistan? I think these are all valid questions to be asked. And at the same time, to be realistic, as you said, ideally, what I would like to see is that for these Taliban leaders to be held accountable for the grave crimes that they have committed. So, yes, ICC is the only institution right now issued few arrest warrants for the Taliban leaders. But ideally, I would like them to be trialed in a court of law and to face the charges for the grave crimes that they have committed against women and girls in Afghanistan. So when it comes to, engagement with Afghanistan and all what is happening in the country, I do know that most of these, countries, they really think about their own national interest. But Afghanistan is quite a unique case because let's go back to 9/11. Let's go back to the first Taliban and the second Taliban takeover in August 2021, and all what is happening in Afghanistan. In all these, I only see Afghans being blamed for all what is happening in Afghanistan. So I think it's time for the international community to think of what they did, what went wrong there, and to take take responsibility for that. In the past 4 years, I have never seen one of these countries or those who are engaged in Afghanistan or diplomats who were extremely engaged in Afghanistan to talk about it, to admit it, and to say that what they have done in Afghanistan was a mistake or where it went wrong. They don't talk about it. It's all about blaming Afghans for not making things work. And I'm not saying that it's all international community. The situation of Afghanistan is way more complex than that. But as I said, it's a collective failure. So they need to accept their responsibility. And at this point, they need to ensure that they need to ensure that they're listening to the will of the people of Afghanistan. The Taliban are not all Afghanistan. The Taliban are not, again, like you listen to women's rights activists. They're not representing women. There is no woman in the Taliban leadership. All women have been, erased from the face of public life. So they don't represent Afghans. And I think that this is what needs to be admitted. And it sometimes annoys me to hear from the diplomats that, oh yeah, Afghanistan has always been like this. We tried to make it work. It didn't. And there's a lot that needs to be unpacked there when they say that we tried to make it work. Again, I don't want to because there's a lot of questions that needs to be asked, but I think it is 4 years on, it's a good time for reflection for these diplomats who are engaged in Afghanistan as well.
And 4 years has taken a lot of documenting, a lot of advocating, a lot of bringing to light the abuses that's happened, which resulted in the ICC calling for the 2 senior Taliban leaders' arrest. Now, for some, these are just tokenistic gestures from an international organization where not many people in the world where we are at the moment would take it seriously. And of course, the Taliban know the practicality of that happening is quite remote. Why then not push for doing more practical things like sanctioning leaders or adding more leaders who are more connected, I suppose, to the outside world, to that list, to making sure that, okay, there will be a day, right? There will be a day that you will be held accountable, as much as we're advocating from outside, but there will be a day that, A, the international community will hold you accountable. And of course, there will be an opportunity for the people of Afghanistan to hold you accountable. So what are the pathways to getting to these two?
So, since last September, a coalition of 90 organizations, including 12 international organizations, 70 plus local organizations, Afghan-led, have been calling on the UN Human Rights Council to establish a dedicated accountability mechanism for Afghanistan. So in similar situations like Iraq, like Syria, like Myanmar, the UN Human Rights Council have established a similar mechanism that is basically documenting human rights abuses in Afghanistan, preserves evidence, and identifies perpetrators. So currently for Afghanistan, we have the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur that is documenting and monitoring human rights violations in Afghanistan. He's doing a great job. His reports have been extremely helpful and have been extremely vital for the work of civil society, especially for women's rights who are advocating, for women rights defenders who are advocating for Afghanistan. But at the same time, the Afghan civil society feel that there is a huge gap in documentation because no one is identifying perpetrators and no one is preserving evidence right now. And the physical evidence can actually go away in the next few years. So for Afghans to have a path for accountability, there is a need for documentation right now. And the sort of documentation, these sort of documentation, actually, no one can do it unless it's a UN-led mechanism, and the UN Human Rights Council can establish such a mechanism for Afghanistan. This mechanism will complement the work of Special Rapporteur for Afghanistan. Basically, the mechanism will prepare case files for future accountability. It will be able to cooperate with the ongoing investigation of ICC, with the potential case at the International Court of Justice under the CEDAW Convention on Elimination of Any Forms of Discrimination Against Women and Girls. So there's a need for the first step is to document the abuses and to identify its perpetrators. And that's why the Afghan civil society have, realized that there's a whole gap, and they have been calling on the UN Human Rights Council to do so. At the Human Rights Council, the the EU is the pin holder for Afghanistan resolution, and we're still very hoping and optimist, calling on the EU to propose the establishment of this mechanism at the upcoming session of Human Rights Council, which is in September, because we believe there is a huge gap in documentation. And this call is also supported by the UN Special Rapporteur on Afghanistan as well. So for any sort of accountability, there is a need for this mechanism to exist, because then the case files that have been prepared of this mechanism could be used for other accountability avenues.
So as we enter the fifth year of the Taliban rule, what do you see in the year ahead?
What I would hope for by the end of this year is to have a free Afghanistan where I can go and live back, where all these, where women's rights are respected, where Afghans are living a dignified life. That's what I would like to see. Realistically, it's difficult to see that because of all what is happening in the world. I think Afghanistan is no longer a priority for the international community. So, similarly, the Taliban have, in the past 4 years, have proved that they're not serious about protecting or respecting human rights in Afghanistan. So, I would like to see this September for the EU to respond strongly to the Taliban and establish this accountability mechanism. So I think that's a very practical thing to do, and I think it's very possible. So it's really in the hands of EU member states at this point to establish that. When the Taliban passed this law last August, we had a Human Rights Council in September, and I would say that so far the EU, the Human Rights Council have continued with business as usual. So I don't think if they have responded to the PDP law. So this is their chance, and this is also an opportunity for Afghans to have a mechanism that can break the cycle of immunity in Afghanistan.
We've had a previous interview, a previous episode with yourself. You've been incredibly inspiring. The people who have not watched it, who have not listened to it, please do. Given that your deep personal involvement in the Afghan affairs, given how you were impacted by what happened, you're the one who now trying to change Afghanistan from the outside, with a lot of personal costs as well. How has that been? Last time we spoke, we talked a lot about the emotions, and now, have you come to terms with the new realities that you're dealing with?
I don't think so. It's very difficult I still cannot believe that we're at the fourth anniversary of the Taliban takeover. We're talking about the fourth anniversary of the Taliban takeover. It's sort of still, for me, it's just like a nightmare. It shocks me sometimes to think about it that, for example, with the ICC issuing arrest warrants for the Taliban leaders based on, the charges are based on the crimes against humanity of gender persecution. The crimes against humanity should shock the humans' conscience. And for me, it's very difficult to believe that this is happening. I think I'm still in denial. I know that I probably said this in the last episode as well. I still think that I still think that it cannot last. What is happening in Afghanistan can't last. It's impossible. It's very dark and grim, and it's impossible for it to stay like this. I think that I think the world needs to act, because what the Taliban doing to this world is unacceptable. Because what is happening in Afghanistan won't stay in Afghanistan. What is happening in Afghanistan is not only an attack on the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, it's an attack globally on the rights of women and girls. And we don't want a world um, I mean, where children uh, are used to hear that there is a country in a corner of this world where its children do not have access to education, for example. So I think, and I mean, and that's what makes it for me very difficult to believe. I'm still very connected to people in Afghanistan. I speak to them, as you said. I live with it. It's not a 9 to 5 job. I live with this work. I mean, I love what I do, and I'm still very committed to the cause, because it's a deep personal connection. I am from Afghanistan. I lived there and I'm still waiting to be able to go back and live in Afghanistan. But as much as it has been 4 years of this madness going on in Afghanistan, I still feel and think that what Afghan women are doing outside Afghanistan matters. And I'm still very hopeful that one day we all will be able to go back to our country and live a life there.
Where do you get that hope and energy from to keep you going day in, day out?
I
It is
probably
very, I mean, we talk often. It is very demoralizing, but where do you get the energy and the hope that, yeah, every step that I take will make a difference? Where does that come from?
I probably said this in the last episode as well, but it's the women of Afghanistan who are not giving up, especially those who are in the country. I was teaching a course this summer on women's rights, and I had students, girls joining from Afghanistan, who are still hopeful to get a law degree, extremely hardworking, brave, courageous girls that reminded me of my own days at university. That where, I mean, at the time I was able to walk into the university building, study, talk to my classmates. I mean, for them, it's all they have is a laptop or probably a screen, and that's the only way that they communicate. But that's what inspires me. These girls, they know that this law degree won't guarantee a job for them, and probably won't guarantee a life under the Taliban. There's a light that they're carrying on. They're still hopeful, and they're still pushing through all these restrictions, and that's what inspires me. And if they still have the hope to do so, I'm no one to give up, because I'm still very privileged. I'm outside Afghanistan. I have a voice, and I'm following their voice and their lead.
And on that inspiring and hopeful note, Fereshta Abbasi, thank you so much. It's really been a privilege to talk to you again.
Thank you so much for having me.